Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We would like to welcome everyone to our Canada Infinite webinar on this beautiful wintry day in Toronto. We're having quite a bit of snow here, so exciting,
it's
beautiful outside. It's still fall, but it's a wintry day in the fall. Today's topic of our webinar is going to be Mythbusters, is Canadian work experience necessary to find meaningful employment? A fascinating topic, but before we jump into our conversation, just a few housekeeping tips for our participants. As you know, many of you know, the webinar is being recorded. The length of the webinar is going to be approximately 1 hour. All participants are going to be muted during the webinar, but you have the option of asking questions through the questions and answer chat window, and we will try to address your questions during the webinar, and we would like to assure you that if you have any other questions that we did not have time to address, we will do our best to relate to these questions later. So you can, the Q&A session would be at the end. The recording of the webinar will appear on the Canada Infonet blog, similar to our previous webinars, as you know. And we would kindly ask you to complete the post-webinar survey in the end, and we will send you also an email about that. So welcome, everyone. A few words about our program, Canada Infonet Pre-Arrival Employment Acceleration and Mentorship. It's a free program, 8 weeks in length on average, delivered by JBS Toronto from our Toronto office in North York here, with other industry partners across Canada. We have served over 4,500 English and French-speaking immigrant professionals immigrating from all over the world since 2016. We serve on average over 1,000 clients per year, so this is pretty impressive. It's quite a robust and big program. We have dedicated employment specialists who support the arriving professionals within the next months of their arrival. And the services include employment preparation and job search, labor market research, connection to Canadian mentors online, preparation of the resume and cover letter for the Canadian standards, and we'll talk more about it today. Canadian workplace culture expectations for success at work. We run employer webinars like the one today. We provide access to the online job matching platform, access to job postings and virtual job fairs. We're now starting preparations for our upcoming job fair, a virtual job fair in March, so stay tuned for that. And of course, soft skills. We will talk more about it today, but some of the specific soft skills that our program offers are trainings in customer service and business writing. So I'm happy to introduce our panelists today. We have a diverse and professional panel of experts from various aspects of job search and building a career in Canada. So our first panelist is Tasneem Ayub. Welcome, Taz.
Hello, thank you.
Tasneem is a marketing manager at RBC. Born and bred in Bangladesh, Tasneem has worked from across Australasia and completed his MBA in the United Kingdom. Tasneem arrived in Canada in 2016. He participated in the Canada Infonet program, which was earlier called CanPrep, before he arrived. So we will hear more of the personal experiences from Taz on being actually a participant of the pre-arrival program and how it translated into professional successful employment in Canada. He came to Canada with over a decade's experience in marketing for top global brands such as Pantene, Nokia, KFC, which is again the case with many of our participants online today. Bringing a wealth of professional knowledge and how does it actually act out in the Canadian labor market, so we will talk about it. After a year in account management for multiple brands, including CIBC, Sponge Towels, and Acura at Multicultural Marketing Agency, he is now working at Canada's largest bank, marketing for the newcomers segment. So this is fascinating. Welcome again.
Thank you for having me here.
Our next panelist is Karen Lewis. Welcome, Karen. Karen is an employment counselor, communications and marketing specialist at JVS Toronto. So Karen is our colleague here. Karen presently balances a few roles at JVS Toronto, being an experienced employment counselor, a consultant, and a social media specialist. Over 20 years of her professional experience, Karen specialized in working with clients facing severe barriers such as mental health, disability, and abuse. In recent years, Karen developed special knowledge in utilizing social media tools for employment, in which she trains clients, colleagues, and community partners. And this is actually one of her most popular workshops that Karen facilitates on how to utilize social media for job search. Karen has also developed curriculum and facilitated training, multiple trainings for newcomer professionals. Karen is a recognized and esteemed specialist in her field. She manages and writes for the JVS Toronto blog, a popular source of career, job search, and labor market information with a worldwide readership, and has been featured on CTV National News as an employment specialist. Welcome, pleasure. And our third panelist today, hope you can see all of us on the screen. Michelle Hanikainen, Resource Manager at Robert Half Management Resources. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi.
It's a pleasure for us to have you with us. So Michelle is a resource manager with Robert Half Management Resources, the world's first and largest specialized staffing firm for temporary accounting, finance, financial services professionals. Michelle specializes in connecting with job seekers and networking with professional associations across the Greater Toronto area. Michelle has worked with Robert Half since 2002. This is quite impressive, and has an incredible wealth of experience with positions in the finance industry, focusing on recruitment of financial services professionals for temporary placements within financial institutions. So I'm sure that within that role, Michelle, and you will probably talk more about that, you came across many newcomers who are just about to embark on their career in Canada. Prior to joining the Robert Half Financial Services team, Michelle worked in business development for a leading mutual fund company and in financial services. Michelle's education, she received her Bachelor of Arts degree in Sociology from Western University, a certificate in adult education and staff training from Seneca College, and is a personality dimension certified training. Michelle's very passionate about working and helping people through community outreach and career assistance. Michelle actively volunteers with the Junior League of Toronto, as well with North York General Hospital, where she is the patient and family advisor, and does some other incredible volunteer work that you will see in her bio here. I would like to welcome Michelle, welcome our other panelists. And the biographies of our panelists today speak for themselves, as we're going to navigate between professional experiences and personal experiences to share information with our participants on what is this concept of Canadian experience? How did it come about? Why do Canadian employers ask this question? Is it allowed even to ask this question? How can newcomers build their presentation of themselves so that the Canadian experience, which is a disadvantage, can play out to their advantage? So this is a fascinating subject that anyone who is new to Canada had to face this way or the other. So let's, without further ado, let's go directly into question number one. Do Canadian employers hire job seekers who are the right fit for the role, regardless of the fact that they're newcomers? And I would like to start with Michelle on this question.
Yes, definitely. I place many people where I meet them, and I work in the temporary space. So my jobs are fairly immediate in nature. So I've had many opportunities to meet a candidate either in my office, or I found them because they've applied, or I do a lot of speaking engagements where sometimes I meet people and I have a job on the go at that time. That person has the skills that are required by the client. We present them, an interview happens, and then they're out to work. So definitely, yeah, if they've got the skills for what the client is looking for, there is the opportunity that they will find something. Some people find it quicker than others. I talk about this a lot. The journey for everyone is different. So a lot of patience needs to be in the job search, not only from newcomers, but new grads, people re-entering the job force. You hear about all the success stories. Someone, gets something as soon as they're done school or as soon as they move here, but that in reality is probably not everyone. There's definitely a lot of time and a lot of hard work and perseverance that happens behind the scenes.
It's interesting how you compare newcomers to new grads. Karen, can you talk a little bit about how employers look at people who are lacking experience in general and Canadian experience in particular?
Yeah. Well, first thing to say that obviously a lot of the newcomers who come to Canada actually do have experience, right? And they have solid experience, and very often employers get to benefit from the fact that they are bringing more experience than Canadians often have, because they come here knowing that they're going to have to work a little harder, and they're often willing to take more, and they have more to offer. So it is a little different, but I think there's a similar kind of prejudice that comes with employers are not sure what it is you bring, whereas if your Canadian experience is there, then it's easy for them to understand it. So I think that's the issue, is how well is your background understood. The question for you is going to have to be, as a job seeker, and it's the same for graduates, is how do you tell people what you have? And the ability to talk about your experience in confident terms, in understandable terms for them. So if there are language and terminology that's different, you need to figure out what that is. And getting to know the employer and the job in Canada, which you can do through looking at positions and looking online. You can be more prepared than another candidate might be. So I think that, yeah, they are similar, but I think that that people coming from another country with experience have a huge advantage, and they need to play that up. And employers can learn to appreciate it if you can present it with confidence.
That's great. And really a great tip for our listeners here. Focus on what you have, because Canadian experience at this point in time is something that most of you don't have. So let's focus on what you have and focus on how you present what you have. That's a great point. Taz, from your perspective, do you think Canadian employers are just looking for the right fit, regardless of whether a person is a newcomer or not? And be honest.
Absolutely. I think it's the key here, I think, is the term right fit. So what may be right for you may not be right for the other person, right? So it's about understanding what they're looking for and speaking to them in a language that they are familiar with. Right. Say, for example, if you are from the, so what in India or in South Asia is known as the FMCG industry, which is fast-moving consumer goods. It's referred to as consumer packaged goods over here in Canada. So if you tell them about you've come from FMCG experience, they wouldn't really understand what you're talking about. And they might think that you speak a different language than they do. So it's about blending in and speaking the language that your employers or your prospective employers will speak.
Speaking the jargon of the employer.
Yeah, really, like I speak a lot about this with people doing their resumes. They're often using acronyms. Even people here use acronyms, and different things mean different, terms to other people. And you have to keep it really simplistic in the communication that you're sending. I was working with candidates, and they're like, well, I did this, and I'm like, I don't see it in your resume. But the way they put it in their resume was not something that I even understood to be doing the same job. So we really needed to simplify the language to ensure the recipient of the resume knows why we presented that individual on a job.
Right, and getting that information from Canadian job postings is going to be the way to do it. So people need to figure out how to write their resume and talk about the experience using the terminology the employers are using in the postings that they have. That is by far the best way to do it. So if you're not finding that acronym anywhere, probably it's the wrong one, and you need to figure out what's the better one. So yeah, it's important to remember that it does sound like a foreign language if it is, if the lingo you use is wrong.
Sorry. So many things, so many resumes are submitted to online portals. So if they're keyword searching and you're not using the right keywords, you might actually be qualified for the opportunity, but you're not getting your resume picked up in that channel.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very recruiter tip. Thank you for saying that.
And it could be things as simple as the words resume and CV, right? As soon as you say that I've sent you my CV, could you please take a look at it? It's a dead giveaway that you're not from Canada, right? So
unless you're applying for academic positions,
right.
Yes, no, but that is true. Yeah.
Okay, so these are great tips and great insight. Let's try to get to the to the bottom of it and understand the term Canadian experience, since we started talking about using the right terminology. Do you think the lack of Canadian experience, what is it actually? Does it mean that employers are afraid? Is it actually another way of saying, this is my fear of the unknown? Or is there something actually solid behind the words lack of Canadian experience? And do we have any tips for our participants on understanding the terminology? Karen?
Well, I think first thing people have to remember that employers want to hire someone who can do the job, right? They're not really interested in where you got your experience per se. What they're interested in is that you can hit the ground running when you start the job. That's the criteria for them. People also forget when they apply for jobs here that a lot of the people interviewing you and your colleagues are most likely going to be immigrants themselves, especially in Toronto. So it's not always a matter of just plain discrimination. It's more a matter of shortcuts. And I think that the point to make for candidates is to remember that the idea of Canadian experience is really just it's kind of a way of putting together their concerns, right? And the concerns might be social. They might be concerns of how you're going to get along with your colleagues. They might be about understanding, more likely, the market that you're going into. So the more you're able to show that these things are not issues, and one of them, for example, is getting a LinkedIn profile that's got Canadian connections in it already. So, think about the things that an employer would be concerned about. Can you do the job? Are you able to get along with your colleagues? Do you have the transferable skills that you need? That's the concern. That's what it means when they ask that question. Sometimes, I just want to say this though, there is discrimination. It happens. We can't pretend that Canadian employers are not capable of that. There's evidence to show that Canadians are just as likely to discriminate against newcomers as any other country. But
with all the diversity and
yes, yeah, and sometimes it's a matter of just being someone different from you, so that you might be an immigrant from this country, but this person is an immigrant from somewhere else, and you don't really understand their accent, or you have certain prejudice about that country they come from. Your role as the job seeker is going to be to show them what it is that you do have. Yeah, and I think that we need to. Yeah, you need to kind of steer away from talking about your experience whether it's Canadian or not, and more about what it is that you can do.
Michelle, lack of Canadian experience from your communication with employers, does it mean they're too busy and they just don't have time to entertain someone whose experience they can't really verify, or is it deeper than that?
To be honest, I don't work a lot with clients directly anymore because many of the financial institutions work through vendor programs. But in the experience in the years I've done this, I think some of the, you heard this lack of Canadian experience. I think some of it's, understanding the customers, understanding the market trends, references, as well in certain roles. Things vary from country to country. So for example, if you are doing like credit even from Canada to the US is drastically different. So there's a lot of a learning curve. So depending, especially in the temporary world, there might not be the opportunity for a large learning curve in certain roles because sometimes they're very temporary in nature. It's, I have someone that's off on a sick leave for 3 months and I need to have someone do that work. And then it really comes down to skills in that. So I don't know that it's necessarily, a lack of time of people looking into this. Sometimes certain roles require certain skill sets and knowledge and experience, and that just comes down to the best candidate. But having done this for many years, I work a lot with international professionals in financial services, and some I am there helping them get their first job, and in some they end up finding it on their own, through their own networks, through their own applications, and everything.
Yeah. Okay. Taz, for you, what does it mean lack of Canadian experience?
So I think it's a catch-all phrase, basically a euphemism for I don't know what you stand for.
Yeah.
Right? It's basically about soft skills and thinking maybe that person doesn't have the same amount of or the same type of soft skills that Canadian employers are looking for. So when you're unsure about hiring someone, it's an easy term to use and say that this person doesn't have Canadian experience.
Yeah, and it's something that you don't really have control over, right?
Right.
So we will talk about how you can gain control over it. But this is something that sounds like non-discriminatory from the employer to express, because this is not something that that has to do with your personality or your
Anything you
soft
can
skills.
share.
They're actually trying not to hurt you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But in the wrong manner.
Yeah, to hurt your feelings
Yeah.
by rejecting you for something that you can control.
Exactly. And
But-
we can't say this enough, but and we keep highlighting the importance of building the understanding of Canadian labor market, of the cues of the workplace communication, showing to the potential employer that you can very easily integrate into their team, because for some of the employers, in different communities, of course, Toronto is very diverse and multicultural, but even here, employers simply don't have the time or don't want to make an effort to consider someone who might potentially not be the greatest fit on a personal level for the team. So the more you can show how adaptable, how personable, how
Likeable you
are, the better chances will be that Canadian experience would not play such a significant role in getting your first job in Canada. So this is another tip. Let's move to the next question. And, many of our participants and many immigrants that we work with here at JVS, when they first come to Canada, until they're looking for that career job or that professional job in their field, many people just, need something to, for the beginning, they need something to provide for the family, and they take on a survival job. What we call a survival job is a job not in your professional field, but something you take as kind of the beginning stage. So can survival job count as Canadian work experience? Michelle, what's your take on that?
Absolutely. I mean, Toronto's an exceptionally expensive city. People that move here, housing, daycare, mortgages, etc., people need to work. And, if you're not able to obtain work, right away or any points in your career, I mean, layoffs happen, people are restructured, people need to obtain employment. So I think any experience is Canadian experience. Often people do leave it off their resume. When I present, I'm often asking about gaps in employment. And often I uncover people are working jobs that they haven't put on their resume. But it's all the skills that you're getting from those jobs. You're getting the Canadian experience. You're dealing in a Canadian workforce. Maybe the workforce isn't the professional one that you're used to going every day. Maybe you're working in a coffee shop or a restaurant or a store, but it's the customer service skills. You're improving your communication skills. You're building connections, building your confidence, attention to detail, organizational skills, depending what you're doing. And those are all super important and should be included in your resume.
Language.
Because all of a sudden, if you've come here and, you haven't worked for a year and a half, 2 years, someone might see your resume and they're like, well, why haven't they been working? And they might not even pick up the phone to call you to find out.
Right.
And meanwhile, you might be doing a lot of great things, but maybe they're not in your chosen fields that you did prior to coming to Canada. So please include them.
Yeah.
Taz, do you know any people from your network who happen to be newcomers and for whom survival jobs played a role in their future career job?
I do. I actually know someone who's had to have survival jobs for 6 years to make ends meet, and then he found a job in his chosen profession, which was in advertising. So I think it's a bit debatable as well, like the gap between survival and professional. So there are some people who would say that don't go for survival jobs because it's not really adding any value to your profession, or it's not relevant experience. But there is some level of relevancy even if you're working at a survival job. Say, for example, if you're working as a customer service representative, you are actually talking to people and building the skills and learning the language that they speak in Canada. So it depends on how you position yourself and what you make of that experience when you're working at the survival job.
And I would even say be selective about the survival job that you choose to pursue. Because just taking a random job is one thing, but taking a survival job that's a stepping stone into your career, which will give you all the benefits that we just discussed, but plus will be something at least relevant, maybe on a lower level, maybe something that doesn't pay that well, but something that would open the doors into the career of your choice. Karen?
I think that I agree with you that it's actually a two-sided issue, because for some professionals, suddenly shifting into jobs that are very different from what they've done can become another source of discrimination. You know, if you're an architect and now you're spending 3 years working in a coffee shop, is that architecture firms might not be so sure, right?
Because your skills might also become a little bit
rusty, and you're not up to date because architecture is a technological field. And so I think that it's a difficult one. As you will see as we go through this, that part of the reason why the Canadian legislation actually doesn't allow employers to discuss Canadian experience is because in the past, before that happened, many people felt obligated to take Canadian experience in any way they could, paid or unpaid, in order to get in here. And I think there's been a rethink of that, you know, that it's not fair to force people to take any experience just so that they can have Canadian experience per se.
So let's talk about the legislation. Where does the Canadian law stand where it comes to Canadian experience? Is it legal to ask this question in an interview? And even if it's illegal, but you're in an interview situation,
right.
What is your advice to our potential job seekers, how to address that?
Well, I think the first thing to know is that the legislation that protects candidates from being asked about Canadian experience is relatively recent. So 2013, we were introduced federal legislation that added Canadian experience to a series of other criteria that employers cannot discriminate.
Under human rights.
Under human rights. So they can't discriminate on the basis of age and gender and race and a whole lot of criteria, and this one was added recently. And the reason it is what I said earlier, is that they were finding that candidates were working for free just to get experience, which is really problematic. So the legislation was introduced, and it's covered by protection, so that if you do get asked the question and you want to take it further, there are human rights tribunals that you can get in front of to discuss this issue and to actually challenge the employers for asking that question. However, you know, many people don't do that. The question is, what do you do when you get asked the question? One of the things to remember is that employers often don't know that they shouldn't ask it. And you mentioned that earlier when we were speaking, right? Employers don't know. They ask that question. I wouldn't say of just without being aware that it's a difficult question, but they don't know they're breaking the law. So if you do get asked the question, don't assume that someone's really being kind of sly and sneaky and trying to break the law. They very often just don't know how to ask the question that they need in a different way. But you can help, and the way to help is to be able to figure out what it is they do want to know. So I've had some candidates say to employers, you know, I just did this program and found out that that question is illegal, but I don't think most employers know it. Here is what I do bring to you, whether it's Canadian or not, and to talk about the skills they do have. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to be honest and say, yes, I don't have Canadian experience, but this is what I do have, right? Sometimes that's just the easiest way, and I really think you need to find the approach that works for you as a person. You need to know your rights, but you also need to know how much you're going to fight for them when you need a job more than anything else. So, you know, the way to do it is simply to be honest and straightforward, to talk about what you do have, to use the right terminology and language, as we said earlier. But knowing your rights is step one, and it's good if you do. So, you know, maybe spend a bit of time reading up about your rights as a Canadian job seeker, and we can provide those resources to you.
And I would actually encourage you to understand the question behind the question. Why are they asking you whether you have lack of Canadian, or whether you have any Canadian experience? Is it because of something within that experience that they're looking for? So try to get to that and answer the question accordingly.
Right.
Michelle,
I think that's a great response to the question and being there, and then, you know, just even referring them back to the Human Rights Code.
Yeah.
You know, if they've got more questions, and like you said, a lot of people might not know it. Interviewers might be the hiring manager. They might not be HR. They might not be up to date on that. They might have been interviewing for the last 30 years and not given that a second thought. So it's great to sort of educate them.
Yeah, and it speaks, when you do that, it speaks to their own preparation as a candidate that you've done.
Exactly.
You're not even here yet, and you're already understanding the law. And so I think that can only be a good thing if you can do it with charm and with a bit of kind of compassion for the employer who might not know otherwise.
That's where the interview practice comes into play.
Absolutely.
Practicing that before it becomes a question.
And be resilient, because it's a process.
Right.
And the more you do it, the better you get at it. So you can practice it with us through Canada Infonet. You can practice it after you arrive with, various employment programs that exist free of charge for participants, because the Canadian government is paying for it. So take advantage of those services before you face the employer in the interview, so that you can be prepared in terms of how to address these questions and how to focus on the positive aspects of your experience and not fall into having to explain the negative or the lack of Canadian experience and all. So let's move more into speaking about internationally trained professionals. How can they demonstrate to the Canadian employers that they actually bring what the employer is looking for, that they are the right fit for the job, and they can fit into their team? We'll start with you.
So, full disclosure, I was unemployed for the first 6 months of landing in Canada, right? So during that time, what I did
Which
was...
is not too bad, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we're all very impatient.
I had hoped it would be easier.
Everyone does. Yes.
But it was on the 6th month of my arrival that I started at a job in my field. So during those 6 months, what I personally did was I used to go to the Toronto Public Library. There are 100 Toronto Public Library spots in Toronto where you can go, sit and access free Wi-Fi, all the resources, books, anything that you want. So first of the day, I used to go and do trainings and certifications. For example, Google AdWords or Google Analytics, things that I kind of knew about but never really got certifications for because I didn't need to back home. So here was the time that I had, and I kept doing these. They're global certifications, globally acknowledged. So if you can put them on your resume, it's like a little win at the end of the week when you put something new in your resume, right? So I used to do that in the first half. And the second half, I used to write to people, try meet people for networking, or send applications for jobs. And basically what I did was kept meeting people. And with each encounter with a new person, I saw a chance to refine my story. And that's how I landed up with my first job, through introductions of people via these coffee sessions.
So we can't underestimate the power of networking.
Absolutely.
And it may be different from country to country, but we hear it from many newcomers. In my country, I never had to look for a job because I was so well known in my field. And here you come to this new situation where you don't know enough people. So what do you do about building that network? Because this is always the best way to connect to potential employment opportunities, because it's about who you know, it's about who can say a good word, different ways of doing that, including you don't have to step out into the snow. You can do it from social media, and you can do it from abroad. So this is a great tip, actually. You can start networking today, regardless of where you are.
Yeah.
Karen.
Use LinkedIn for that, right? So that's really a good starting point. And that's the fantastic thing about it, is you don't have to literally be in the country in order to start networking in it. You come at a big disadvantage. The advantage Canadians have is that they have a network. They were born into a network. They went to school and developed a network. You've got a job to develop that network from scratch. And it means a lot of reaching out, and just as you were doing, having the coffee and all of that. That's one piece, and I think that is key. It kind of answers the question of, are you an outsider or are you an insider? When you have lots of internal connections, then people stop wondering about that. But the other thing to do is to get to know the job market well. And again, you can do that remotely. Yeah. Read the job titles. I always think of the job postings that you'll find online as a fantastic source of data for you. What are people asking for? What soft skills are they focusing? Are they focusing on soft skills? How do they hire? What certifications do they want you to get? And by the way, this thing of obtaining local credentials once you're here is useful as well. Getting courses, making connections, and getting to know the job market is really important. And when you know you're facing the employer, you have to know the company, you have to know the job, and you have to know what it is you have to offer both of those. That's the part that completely overrides any concerns about Canadian experience.
Thank you. And Michelle, so what are some of the tips that you usually give to job seekers from Robert Half on how to demonstrate international experience to Canadian employers?
I think, when you're applying for the job, you want to make sure in your resume that you're capturing the experience as per the job posting. So if you're applying to one online, that you would get it from that. If you're working with a recruiter, we would be sending you the description of the role that we're discussing with you. And we've already assessed, do you meet the must-have and nice-to-have skills of that temporary role? And then we're going to send you all of the details so you can make any adjustments to your resume, add in, if you've left stuff out to ensure that, you've captured all of those points. But I think part of it starts even before you're even applying for the job. It's putting together your LinkedIn profile. So important. It's putting together your resume, the cover letter, starting the bones of that and what kind of, you're going to portray to the market. That's sort of your first chances when you send the resume, or that first correspondence that you send to someone is so important. How does that come across? Is it professional in nature? The language? Sometimes I get some emails, and it's like, hey, can you get me a job? And that's it with the resume. So, it's even that correspondence, it's on the phone, it's via email, it's, in person, it's thinking about those things. But when you get to the interview, it's selling those skills and accomplishments versus that job description and doing the research. Know about the company, know about the person if you can that you're going to be interviewing for. Go to their LinkedIn profile, find out a bit about their story from what you can tell. And depending how much someone has privacy fields in there, make sure that you're well prepared, do the research, practice before the interview, whether that's an in-person, on the phone, video interview, so they know that you've invested the time in that preparation for that meeting and selling yourself and why you might be a good fit.
Yeah, that's great. And, it's the networking and demonstrating yourself, but it's also the power of research. There are so many differences between different occupations. For example, at JVS, we work a lot with internationally trained architects, and through our experience with internationally trained architects, the experiences and the responsibilities in what is called an architect varies from country to country. So you might be applying for architectural positions in Canada, but the responsibilities of an architect here are so much different from some of the other countries in the world. So unless, again, you're prepared, you're speaking the right language, you're addressing the right needs that the employer has, and this is another aspect that we always discuss with our job seekers, understand what the employer needs. And this requires research, this requires work. Of course, our employment counselors or employment specialists can help you do it. But don't postpone it. You can do it while you are still in your home country before you even arrive. Research the companies, research the positions, research the responsibilities, and make sure that you have all of these skills on your resume and all this experience listed in relation to a particular job that you're applying for. This would make you a better fit for the position.
One thing just to add that I always give as a tip is to have a look at other people in your field on LinkedIn and see what they are saying. Often you'll see if they themselves are newcomers. You can tell by where they got their education and things like that, and see what they're doing on their LinkedIn profile. What are they emphasizing as their skills? What are they emphasizing as their strengths? Reach out to them. Don't ask them what Michelle was asked, which is, can you get me a job? But ask them some practical questions and maybe say to them, I'm planning on coming to Canada. Any tips on where I can begin looking? People are happy to offer tips. They're not always happy to be the responsible one to find you a job, but they will definitely do what they can because they've been there and they know. So look at the profiles, learn from them, and then connect with people who you think might be in a position to support you.
And you can start building your own brand on LinkedIn because, if you bring a lot of professional experience in a space, you can start to create your own post, share articles, share your thoughts, experiences, write articles, start to create a network that way and, grow even before you start coming here. Start commenting on other people's posts. Many people are out there sharing articles or for their network, so make sure to get involved and start to comment in a positive way and share your thoughts and experiences, and create connections that way.
Right.
Or reach out to professional associations, many of whom have online presence. Michelle, you are actively involved with many professional associations Canada, and there's so many of them.
There are, and there's a lot of like organic ones, you know, starting to set up. So I deal a lot and have extensively with many foreign professionals, a lot in the financial services area. So I do a lot of work in the compliance space. So I know 5 individuals who together sort of collectively decided to set up some foreign professional mentoring events. They all work in this space. They're all working full time. They have jobs. Many have come to Canada, maybe recently or, you know, at some point in their career, or saw a need here. And they started to create events. They found a space. They sought out speakers. They've had 3 events. I was at the one they hosted most recently as one of their speakers. And on a cold November night, they sold out and had 75 people there, out connecting, who invested, you know, a little bit of money, not an extent, you know, a very expensive fee, but they were fed. They had a great night of speakers. I learned things, and I'm not on the job, and it was all about branding, but from different perspectives, different people's experiences. And these are just, you know, some individuals that saw a need and found a way to make it happen. And I can only imagine how it's going to grow beyond this after seeing the event that they pulled off last week. So you could start your own meetup or, you know, group, or even just a group on LinkedIn that doesn't cost a lot of money to do.
Yeah, or capitalize on mentoring. We, you know, our program offers a mentoring component. We, you know, try our best to connect each participant to the mentor in their field and in the province of their arrival. Capitalize on that, you know, through that experience of having a mentor, build the skills to reach out to other people and maybe tap into your mentor's network, but also build the capacity for yourself on your own to be able to connect to other people. Yes?
Absolutely. So I actually found a few mentors, and I was lucky to have that. I got different perspectives as well. So it kind of helps you a lot if you have that rooted in Canadian experience person who talks to you about how the similarities work in your favor, or maybe some dissimilarities work against you. So I think that's always a great thing. One thing that I would like to touch upon, since I'm a marketer, and Michelle kept referring to brand building your own brand on LinkedIn. It's about, so in advertising, we have this new school of thought that don't ask people to buy if they don't need you, right? So if you just keep them, so if you just send them an ad and say, please buy, they don't really care because it's not relevant for them. It's a lot like asking someone to marry you before you date it. Right?
Give me a job.
Right. So you don't know that person. Why would you give that person a job?
Right.
You haven't met that person. Why would you even mentor that person? But if you write to them in a way or reach out to them in a way that's actually shows that you have common factors with that person. So say for example, call yourself a Rohit in India. So if you're a Rohit in India, find out who the equivalent of Rohit in Canada is, or Toronto is, or maybe the organization that you're looking for, who's the Rohit there, and try and reach out to that person and say, hey Rohit, I see lots of similarities between your profile and mine, but I'm coming to Canada now, or I've recently arrived in Canada, and I would like to know more about how it works here. Would you be able to spare 30 minutes of your time and meet me or talk to me about a quick session for an information interview?
So similarities is a great way to start. Karen, can you speak a little bit to some tips on how to connect to people that you don't know in the cyberspace? And before you ask for something, show genuine interest in what you found in their profile.
Right. So first thing, obviously, create a good profile, right? So your profile needs to be an interesting one where people can look at it and they could see how it is that you have what it is that they might be needing. But the other thing to do is to first just connect, you know, send out, don't be shy. I find that newcomers, and I don't blame them, I remember that myself having arrived here a few decades ago, being very unsure you know, what people expect and whether I can be, am I being too confident and maybe I should be a little quieter, and maybe as a woman I shouldn't speak out too loudly.
And don't be too formal.
Yeah,
don't write Dear Miss Lewis.
Right. And first thing, you can make those mistakes and be open to be corrected a little bit. You can be human. But I think that the way to do it is to just connect with people person to person. And, just as you did, ask little bits of advice, connect first and then just say, thank you so much for the connection. I want you to know that this is who I am and this is where I'm, possibly coming to Canada. Don't push. If you push too hard, people push back because they get a lot of these calls. Yeah.
Where's the line though?
Well, I think the line is to go slow. Put yourself in that person's position. If you were in a full-time job and a busy life, and you're getting lots of these kind of reach outs, is to simply be able to answer the question, give people questions they can answer quickly, and thank them, give them a break, and then come back to them and say, you suggested I look into this. I did. And I'm wondering about this piece. So show them that you're not relying on them completely, but it's like an orchestra a little bit. You have to kind of set people up and pick and use, take little bits of information and go back to people, be grateful, share things, thank them. And when things do start happening for you, thank the people who offered you connections. I came across someone who introduced me to a job 20 years later. And I still am so grateful, and he barely remembered who I was. It really is a nice thing to stay in touch and be grateful. And then to take on the role later on yourself of offering the same, being in the same position to help others. And don't wait for that. A lot of newcomers come here and they very quickly get involved in helping roles themselves. And I think that's also a place to build networks. But I think the bottom line is just pace yourself. Don't push one person too hard, and don't get too hurt if people are not responsive. Not everyone is in a position to help or is comfortable doing it. So you have to go where the soft spots are. You have to respond to the people who are open. It's a game of patience. Really.
This is a very good point.
Balance will kind of unfold because it's one date at a time.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think when you're sending invitations on LinkedIn, try to make them personal.
Yeah.
I get many invitations based on the work I do, and some I know why they want to connect based on their profiles, and others I'm not really sure. There's no introduction to it. I might need to do a bit more research to see whether I'm going to accept it or not, because it might not be anything in the field that I work in.
Right.
So I think that just makes for a good sort of first step. But I think it's, getting away from just doing everything online, going back to the basics and getting out there in person and connecting with people. And it's something I heard someone say last week. It's about every human interaction, and it's starts like when you go to the grocery store, on your commute in the morning, and then beyond the workplace, the networking events and stuff like that. So starting small, because you just never know. You never know when you're going to meet someone on the GO train or the bus or just randomly at an event, and that makes the right introduction that gets you that start.
Yeah,
So.
but you need to have your story in place and to make sure that it's relevant to the person that you're contacting. And let's go back to so we spoke a lot about the networking piece, but let's go back to understanding how employer minds work in Canada. I just wanted to mention one thing about networking before we move on. For the networking piece, it's not that it's something that only newcomers need to do. So I don't want our audience to get the understanding that we're only pushing newcomers to do it. This is the nature of the Canadian society. This is the nature of the Canadian labor market. These are the things that are widely acceptable, and they're done by everyone. All professionals network all the time. And it's not that Michelle is only contacted by people who are new, either newcomers or new grads, and correct me if I'm wrong. This is the nature of how things work in the professional world here. So about employers, Michelle, a question for you. Do employers that your recruitment company works with consider job seekers from outside of Canada at all? This is a question from our audience.
Well, definitely, because for me, like I was saying earlier, I work on temporary roles. So when we get requisitions, they are, we get a job description, but we also get the must-haves and nice-to-haves of that client. So I am working to identify, ideally, the person that meets both of those, or persons, depending how many roles I have to work on. And if not, definitely the must-have skills. And so that for me comes down to wherever you got them. If you're the candidate that has the must-have and nice-to-have skills, ideally, that's who I'm looking to put forth. So it really comes down to your resume as an initial that you're sending, covers, enough detail that I know looking at it potentially to reach out to you. In terms of building some Canadian experience, if you're not getting an opportunity right away, maybe you have a survival job, but maybe getting involved in volunteering and getting some Canadian experience. And I'm not saying volunteering with a company, but maybe it's with a not-for-profit. Maybe you have an interest in a particular area. I receive resumes where people have moved here and they're looking to, gain some experience, and, they're out even just volunteering at events, helping them on the day of event and going out and, giving, 5-6 hours of their time
And it's a give
to
and
get out
take.
there.
Get an opportunity to meet people there.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
just a little tip on that. If you are clear as a candidate where you'd like to work, figure out which companies are involved in which events. The banks, for example, are very involved with a whole lot of corporate social responsibility, including, for example, one of the banks does a breast cancer walk every year. And I've had clients who've got involved in leading teams who have then been able to put that on their resume and link up with people at the bank based on that. And now they've got a network at the bank that they're targeting. So, it can be quite a useful strategic approach if you're careful about how you do it. So getting some volunteer experience is a good idea.
Or volunteering with a charity that your employer is already.
Well, that's what I'm saying, yes.
That our employer is already involved with.
Yeah, and I've seen that work well.
And these are things you can put on your LinkedIn profile too.
Okay.
Your volunteer experience, one-off courses. So, like the ones you were doing online, you can put them in there. You don't have to have a degree or certificate or diploma. You can input, individual courses that you've done that would be searchable within that profile.
Absolutely. So if you're coming to Toronto, you'll see that there's a website called volunteertoronto.ca. You can find different types of volunteer opportunities with the time and commitment that you need. So yeah, you could take those on and use them for your LinkedIn and your resume as well.
And control the time. You don't have to be there for more than just a few hours altogether, or maybe a couple hours a week. So it doesn't eat into your life and your job search, because it can be expensive if you're not careful.
They will usually mention how much time commitment you'd need. Yeah.
And again, I just want to stress that this is not advice that we're only giving to newcomers.
Yes.
This is true to anyone, particularly job seekers who are looking to expand their networks, regardless of whether they're a newcomer or not. But this is so embedded into the Canadian society that almost, employers would expect you to have some volunteer experience, or at least to talk about some volunteer experience that will show that you are the fit, that you are the adaptable, that you are the person that they're looking for. Our next question also came from the audience, and it's kind of a scenario. So being a middle-aged newcomer who worked with nonprofits outside of Canada for over 9 years, what would you suggest around expectation management? Should I expect a similar position, or it may require a couple of years to get there, or should I not even apply for these positions? Yeah.
My advice is always start from what you want. Don't assume that you won't get what you want, because you might get it, and then that would be a great shame not to attempt it. So target the jobs you think you can do and try it for a while. Apply for them, see how people respond. If you're finding that people are, that it's not working and people are not responsive, take a step down and go, okay, let me try one level down. Maybe the fact that I don't know what the issues are in this, because if it's nonprofits, it's social issues, right? So maybe people feel like I don't know enough about what's going on in Canada, and they want me to start one level down, and then you can move down. But I think that often if you start high, you might be surprised that people will jump in it, and especially if you are in the nonprofit sector, in the community service organizations, where we're serving a lot of immigrants ourselves, and having international experience is an asset.
Speaking another language.
Right, and I was going to say that generally to people is, remember that your international experience isn't a disadvantage, it's an asset. It's an asset that many Canadians don't have. And don't be shy to talk about it with some confidence, because it's useful. We live in a globalized economy, and having international experience is something that you should be proud to leverage.
If you don't take the shot, you'll never hit the target.
Yeah.
So you should always go for it. And like Karen said here, like if you don't see any response there, maybe take a step down. But you shouldn't short sell yourself from the beginning.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If you
Michelle?
don't ask, the answer is always no.
Absolutely. I would also add that, even if you have to take a step down, have the vision of your long-term plan.
Exactly.
Don't lose sight of that, because many people who opt for a lower position just as the beginning get stuck in that lower position or get stuck in a survival job. So try to encourage yourself and seek help if needed to develop that long-term plan and take specific steps to achieve the long-term plan if this is what you want to do. But even, applying for the higher position, you need to be prepared in order to pursue that, because in the management roles, the Canadian experience question is going to be even more relevant, because if you're in a supervisory role, your potential employer would expect even more of those competencies of understanding how Canadian workplace works. So do your homework on that and present the responses to these questions and acquire some experience that you can do without even being employed, like some of the tips that we mentioned today.
Yeah, also remember, I've seen it a lot of the years I've been here, is that when people start 1 or 2 steps below what they used to do, it doesn't take long before they move forward. So you don't have to get stuck if you do have a plan. And sometimes you just need to reassure yourself and others that you can do it. And maybe a year or half a year in a position is enough for you to get promoted. And employers maybe need to figure that out, by having you there.
So I'll use a personal anecdote here. Like when I started my first job in Canada, I was offered an internship at the beginning, and I just went back to the employer and asked, "What am I trying to take away from this internship?" And they got back to me and said, "Okay, we'll hire you as an account manager." Okay, and it was a 2-month contract, and by the end of the 2 months, I kind of knew that I would be hired, and I would be promoted very soon. And by the end of the year, I was actually an account director leading the entire team. So it's okay to get in at a position which is a step down, as long as you have the confidence and the skills to pull it off and go forward from there.
And it might be easier. It might be a better way to start.
Because you've done that journey before.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's true.
A great success story.
Yep.
So another question here, if we can just go over an ideal response for the Canadian experience question.
So if you get asked that question, how do you respond? So as I said to you, I think that you really need to make sure that you're comfortable answering however we recommend, because if you're not, don't do it. You have to find something that works for you. But the ideal response would be to say, if you're comfortable, I understand from some of the research I've done that that's not a question employers are supposed to ask, but I think it's fair for you to know that I have not got Canadian experience. What I do bring is the following, and then be able to talk about what it is that they want. And remember, looking at the job posting, that they've specified very clearly what they want. As Michelle was talking about, what are the must-haves, what are the would-be nice pieces. Focus on what it is you have that they want, and move very quickly and confidently away from that question into what it is you want to tell them. So I think that's a safe bet, but it depends on how confident you are to kind of try and tell them about what they should be asking you. If you're not comfortable doing that, simply say to them, well, here is what I do bring you, and focus on that alone.
Great. So I just wanted to repeat that so that people can take note of, what would be ideal responses, since this is the theme of our webinar. A specific question for you, Taz, on a marketing role. So someone from the audience is asking, since consumer behavior is highly dependent on culture, and it might take some time for a newcomer to get a hang of it, is it a good idea for a marketer to start with an advertising agency?
It could be. It depends. So when I got here, I found this term called multicultural marketing, which I'd never heard of before, right? Because Canada is or Toronto is such a multicultural place right now, there are agencies that target to ethnic target audiences so that they don't feel left out, because it is a huge market. If you look at the 2013 data by Environics, only South Asians and the Chinese people, they had a spending power of $1.2 billion, right? And this is quite old data. The numbers have grown. So if you're looking at that, people are actually targeting newcomers themselves. Big companies, big brands, they're targeting newcomers and people who have been in Canada from somewhere else. So it might actually be a good idea to start off with even a multicultural marketing agency. Again, it's about demonstrating how well you understand and know the culture. You don't necessarily have to go down that route, but it is an option.
I think, you know, just to start wrapping up our conversation, there were some wonderful tips from our panelists today. But I think the most powerful message is capitalize on what you have. Don't go too much into what you don't have, because this is the interviewer's job, the employer's job is to try to find out what you don't have. Your job is to capitalize on what you have, be positive, and try to present your experience in such a way that it would be appealing to the Canadian employers. Mm-hmm. Any final remarks?
Just one thing. I think that you don't have to be perfect. You can come in saying, I've got learning to do, I know it. I think one of the things that employers are looking more and more for is a bit of critical self-awareness. So you don't have to pretend that you're coming in knowing everything, because no one does. You have to go in being able to say, I'm coming in with these strengths. I know I've got some learning to do in this area or another. I'm excited to learn, and I'm willing to do what it takes to get there, right? And that kind of attitude really helps employers see past whatever deficits you might be bringing them.
Great. Michelle?
That's excellent advice. And I think just being yourself, let your personality and your own soft skills shine through. And why they want to hire you, because it's not only the technical skills, and you want someone in your workplace that's going to get along and be part of a team and stuff. And I think sometimes people don't sort of they've got that interview persona, and then when you actually get to work, and I think you want to let a bit of your personality and authenticity show off in all your interactions.
Yeah, it's all about people at the end. So with that in mind, Taz, would you like to say anything final?
I think we've covered it all. Basically, do your research, be very good at research, mm-hmm. Network like crazy, and refine your story. Sell your story in a way that's understandable to the person that's looking to hire you, or the person that you want would hire you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our panelists again, Michelle, Karen, Taz. I think this was a great conversation. Please feel free to continue posting your questions. We will forward the questions to our team and the panelists according to the questions that you are asking. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating today, and good luck to everyone.
Yes, good luck.
Thank you.
Meeting you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.